Sleep Talk with Carl Jung. Deep healing, self-worth, and inner peace. Tonight, we're entering one of the most tender, most necessary spaces in the human heart. The place where self-love, letting go, and the long journey home to yourself all meet. The question that lives quietly in so many of us, especially in the late hours, when the noise of the day finally goes still. Why is it so easy to love everyone else, and so impossibly hard to love myself? And before we begin, let me remind you of something important. You're not here to take notes. You're not here to solve anything tonight. You're here to rest, to let Jung's wisdom on self-love, letting go, and coming home to yourself, dissolve into your unconscious, while you drift into the peace you've been searching for. So go ahead. Let your body sink deeper into the bed. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice your breathing slowing, your muscles releasing the tension they've been holding all day. There is nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to become tonight. You are simply here, listening, letting go. And for those of you who are ready for something deeper than tonight, there is a space where people are doing this work more fully, breaking patterns they've carried for years, waking up differently, finally accessing a kind of self-love they once thought wasn't possible. Daily prompts, deeper meditations, a shared space of people doing this work together, and if that calls to you, you'll find it there. But for now, just stay here, because what we're about to move through together is the psychology of self-abandonment, the patterns of giving too much, the art of genuine letting go, and the quiet, extraordinary process of coming home to who you truly are. Just let it wash over you, like a gentle tide, carrying away what no longer serves you. You don't need to remember any of this. Your system already knows what to do with it. Jung believed that true transformation does not come through force, but through awareness, meeting surrender, and tonight, that is exactly what is being offered. Awareness, wrapped in rest, healing, woven into sleep. So if your eyes are not already closed, allow them to close now. Let the world outside fade. And let me ask you something, quietly, honestly. Have you ever felt this? You pour your time, your energy, your attention, sometimes your entire sense of self, into other people, into relationships, into roles, into the endless work of being what others need you to be. And somewhere in all of that giving, you lose the thread back to yourself. You can no longer clearly feel what you want, what brings you alive, what it feels like to sit in your own presence, without needing to fill the space with something, anything, just to avoid the quiet of being alone with yourself. Jung pointed to something that most people sense, but rarely say directly. The inability to love yourself is not a flaw. It is a wound formed early, in environments you may not fully remember, through repeated experiences that taught you your worth was something to be earned, rather than something you simply had. And from that wound, a pattern forms, always giving more than you receive, always accommodating more than you ask to be accommodated, always finding it easier to meet the needs of others than to even recognize your own, and calling that love, when often it is something else. It is the wound, wearing love's clothing. And tonight, we begin to see that more clearly, because when self-love becomes real, not something spoken, but something lived quietly, in how you stay with yourself, everything begins to change. The relationships you enter, the ones you leave, the way you hold your grief, the way you release what was never yours to carry, and the experience of returning to a self that has been waiting with more patience than you can imagine for exactly this moment. So stay here, all the way through, because what you have been searching for has never been as far away as it felt. It has been here, all along, waiting for you, to turn toward it. And now, gently, we begin. Why you give so much, and still feel empty? Because on the surface, it looks like love. And, in many ways, it is. But look more closely at what that love costs you. How many times have you said yes, when everything in you wanted to say no? How many times have you softened what you felt, just to keep the peace? How many times have you made yourself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient, less visible, in order to maintain a connection that required you to be less than you are? And after all of that, after the giving, the adjusting, the constant effort to fit, how often have you still felt empty, still unseen, still as though something essential never quite arrived? That is not random. That is a pattern. And it has a psychological structure. Jung said, "You do not attract what you consciously want. You attract what lives in the deeper layers of your unconscious, where old fears, early wounds, and inherited beliefs continue to shape your reality. And one of the most powerful of those beliefs sounds something like this: I am not enough. To be loved as I am, I have to earn it. I have to be useful enough, easy enough, low maintenance enough. And if I show too much, need too much, feel too much, the love will disappear." That belief was never a choice. It was formed in the emotional climate you were shaped in the way love was given, and sometimes withdrawn, before you had the ability to question what you were learning. And from that belief, an entire identity begins to form. The one who gives more than they receive, who tries harder, loves deeper, and quietly carries the sense that their needs are a problem, and their worth is conditional. And so the safest thing becomes to remain useful, to remain easy, to remain needed, so that the connection stays. There was someone, we can call her Sarah, someone everyone described as warm, generous, endlessly reliable, if you needed something. She was there. She remembered what mattered to people. She showed up in crisis. She held space for others without hesitation. And from the outside, she looked like one of the most loving people anyone knew. But late at night, when everything became quiet, when the roles fell away, there was a feeling she could never quite name. Not sadness exactly, not loneliness in any obvious sense, but something hollow, like a space that had never truly been filled, like a house that everyone visited, but no one lived in. She gave constantly, and still felt unseen, as if the most real part of her had never quite entered the room. And when she began to look inward, to do the work beneath the surface, something became clear. She had not been giving from fullness. She had been giving from fear, not deliberately, not consciously, but from the deep belief that if she stopped being useful, stopped holding everything together, stopped asking for nothing, the love would disappear, because that is what she had learned early, that love stayed when you performed the right version of yourself and withdrew when you did not. And so her life became a quiet performance, warm, capable, endlessly available, and underneath it all, profoundly alone. Jung described this as identification with the wound, when the part of you that was hurt becomes the part of you that leads, and instead of healing it, you search for someone to carry it for you, to love you enough, to make you feel whole. But no one can do that. And so the cycle continues. You give more. You try harder. You hope that if you just offer enough, something will finally fill the place inside that has always felt just out of reach. And the paradox is, the more you give from that place, the more empty you feel, because giving from lack is not love. It is exchange. It is a quiet attempt to secure belonging by offering a version of yourself that feels acceptable. And every time you receive that reassurance, it fades quickly, because nothing external can reach the place where the wound actually lives. And if something in this feels familiar, if you have ever given so much that you lost yourself in the process, then just recognize that, quietly, without judgment, because you are not alone in this. And more importantly, this is where something begins to change. And the fact that you are here, listening, at whatever hour this is for you, tells me something important, that something in you is already beginning to understand, that the giving has to start with yourself, not instead of others, but before, always before, because real self-love is not selfish. It is the foundation, the ground beneath everything else, and without it, every relationship becomes a reaching, a searching, a quiet hope that this time someone else will finally give you what you have never quite learned to give yourself, and that searching continues through different people, different situations, different versions of the same pattern, until the moment you turn inward, toward the interior, toward the wound, toward the part of you that has been waiting, patiently, and you begin, for the first time, to love it as it actually is, not as it would need to be, in order to deserve love. And that is where everything begins. Not with a perfect relationship, not with a perfected version of yourself, but with the willingness to stay, to remain here, with what is real, with what is present, with the full, complicated, deeply human reality of who you are, right now, exactly as you are, without needing to earn it, without needing to become better first, because you're already enough. And tonight, slowly, gently, you may begin to feel what that actually means. And as this understanding deepens, another question begins to form, quieter, but more precise. If the emptiness is not about finding the right person, or giving more, or trying harder, then what is it really about? What is actually operating beneath the giving, the accommodating, the endless effort to remain acceptable? Here, Carl Jung offers something essential. He called it the persona. The persona is the mask, the social self, the version of you that learned how to exist in the world, to be accepted, to feel safe, to receive love. And it is not wrong. It is necessary. Without it, we could not function in relationship at all. But the difficulty begins, not when you have a persona, but when you forget that you are wearing one, when the mask becomes so familiar, so automatic, so completely woven into your way of being that you can no longer feel the difference between what is performed and what is real. And slowly, without noticing, the face beneath the mask becomes harder to access, even for you, and for many people, especially those who learned early that love required adaptation. The persona forms around one central rule: be acceptable, be easy to love, be the version of yourself that keeps connection intact. And everything that does not fit that rule, every need that feels too much, every feeling that feels too intense, every part of you that is inconvenient, or uncertain, or messy, is quietly moved elsewhere, into what Jung called the shadow, the hidden interior, and the persona becomes more refined, more capable, more polished. The version of you that others find easiest to respond to, easiest to stay with. There was someone, we can call her Claire, and from the outside, her life appeared full, stable, respected. She had a career that worked, relationships that functioned, a reputation for being warm, reliable, present. She was, as she described it, very good at being fine, at taking whatever she felt internally and translating it into something acceptable, something manageable, something that would not disturb the space around her. But one evening, sitting alone, after a long day of being exactly what everyone needed her to be, something unexpected surfaced. Not sadness, not quite. Something deeper, a kind of exhaustion that did not belong to the body, but to the self. The exhaustion of someone who has been performing for so long that the idea of simply being feels unfamiliar, almost unreachable. She described it later as looking into a mirror and seeing someone she recognized, but did not truly know. The face was familiar, the expression was familiar, but the connection was missing, like watching a performance that had become so convincing. It replaced the person who once existed beneath it, and in that moment, a question appeared, quietly, but with unusual clarity. Who is actually here? Behind all of this? Behind the competence? Behind the warmth? Behind the constant fine? Who is the one? All of this was built to protect. Jung wrote that the persona is not what you truly are, but what both you and others come to believe that you are. And this is not criticism, it is observation, because the persona is not false, it is partial. It is the version shaped by experience, by what was allowed, by what was rewarded, and by what had to be hidden. And when you live inside that version long enough, the parts that were hidden do not disappear. They remain in the shadow, quieter, less visible, but still present. And over time, they begin to speak, not loudly, but through subtle signals, the hollow feeling, the exhaustion that rest does not fix, the quiet sense that even in moments that should feel full, something essential is missing. And if you have ever experienced that, even briefly, that distance between who you appear to be and who you feel yourself to be inside, then you already understand this more than you think, because that moment of recognition, that small awareness, is the beginning, the first opening, the place where something real can begin to return, slowly, carefully. And from here, another question naturally emerges. What do you do with everything that went into the shadow? The needs, the feelings, the parts of you that were never given space to exist openly. Because this is where the work becomes deeper, more complex, but also more alive. Because what lives in the shadow is not only what is difficult, it is also what is most originally yours. And this is something Jung understood with great clarity. The shadow is not simply darkness. It is everything that was not allowed, everything that did not fit, everything that was too much, too little, too different, too real for the environment you were shaped in. And yes, it can include anger, jealousy, need, parts of the self that feel uncomfortable, but it also includes the parts that are deeply alive, creativity that was dismissed, sensitivity that was misunderstood, joy that was too loud, ambition that felt unsafe to express, the natural energy of who you are before it was filtered. When those parts were moved into the shadow, they were not lost. They became inaccessible, and the cost of that is the feeling of giving, without being fully present in what you give, because what is being offered is not the whole self, but the acceptable version, the performance. And no matter how kind, how genuine, how well-intended that performance is, it cannot feel complete, because something real was left out. There was another woman. We can call her Amy, and she grew up in a space where emotion was not directly rejected, but quietly redirected, where expression was softened, contained, managed, where feeling deeply was not something that could fully exist. And over time, she learned, not through instruction, but through experience, which parts of herself could be shown and which needed to be held back. And like so many others, she adapted. She became functional, capable, composed. But beneath that, something remained, waiting, not gone, not broken, just unseen. And as you sit here now, listening, there may be a part of you, recognizing this quietly, not as something to fix, not as something to judge, but simply as something to begin to notice. The way the atmosphere of the house changed when something uncomfortable surfaced, becoming tight, slightly dangerous, in a way that everyone could feel, and no one named. Amy learned early that feelings which were too big needed to go somewhere quiet, and so they did. They moved inward, into the shadow, and as she grew, she became known for something very specific: her calm, her steadiness, her ability to handle difficult situations without breaking. People relied on that. They trusted it. It made them feel safe. But inside, beneath that steadiness, something else was forming, a pressure, built slowly, over years, made of everything that had never been allowed to exist fully. The grief, the anger, the longing, the fear, all of it present, but unseen. And then one ordinary afternoon, in a meeting where nothing particularly important was happening, something shifted, without warning. A wave of emotion rose, complete, overwhelming, unfamiliar in its intensity, and she had to leave the room, not to escape anything external, but to allow something internal to finally move. She stood alone in a corridor and cried, not about the meeting, not about anything she could clearly name, but about everything. Everything that had been waiting. Everything the shadow had been holding. Finally, finding a way to be felt. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this is what had been happening, quietly, persistently, through the fatigue that made no sense, through the flatness that followed even meaningful achievements, through the subtle sense that she was performing her life, rather than inhabiting it. And in that corridor, in that unexpected moment, something important was happening. Not a collapse, but a release. Not a breakdown, but an opening. The unconscious, becoming conscious. The shadow, finding its way toward the light. Not to harm, but to free. Because the shadow does not become dangerous when it is seen. It becomes dangerous when it is denied. When the parts of you placed there are kept in the dark, indefinitely. They do not disappear. They continue to move, to influence, to shape your life from beneath the surface, through patterns you cannot quite explain, through reactions that feel larger than the moment, through repeated attractions to the same kinds of people, the same situations, the same outcomes, through the quiet hollowness that follows even your most genuine efforts. The shadow keeps speaking, and when it cannot speak directly, it speaks through symptoms, through exhaustion, through disconnection, through the sense that something real is always just beyond reach. And bringing the shadow into awareness does not mean acting on everything within it. It does not mean removing all structure or becoming unfiltered. It means something quieter, more precise. It means recognizing what is already there, saying to the anger, "I know you are here," to the grief, "I know you are here," to the desire, the fear, the parts of you that were hidden, "I know you are here. You belong to me. I am not afraid of you." And in that recognition, something begins to shift. The energy that was used to contain, to suppress, to manage, becomes available again, and the self, the full, complex, real version of you, begins slowly to breathe. And if as you listen, there is something in you that feels familiar, some part that has been waiting, something that was too much, or not enough, or simply not allowed, then that awareness itself is the beginning, not something to fix, not something to force, just something to notice, to acknowledge, quietly, without judgment. And from that point, something new becomes possible, something many people, after years of giving, of adapting, of performing, begin to lose sight of, the possibility of real self-love. Not the surface version, not the repeated phrases, but something deeper, something that changes the structure of how you relate to yourself. Most people imagine self-love as something soft, something simple, comfort, rest, small acts of care, and these things matter, but they do not reach the place where the wound lives. They exist at the surface, and if you have practiced them, and still feel that quiet emptiness, It is not because they are wrong. It is because they are incomplete. The deeper version is more demanding, but also more freeing. And again, Jung approached this differently, not through the language of self-love, but through something he called individuation, the process of becoming fully, irreducibly yourself, not the version shaped by fear, not the version shaped by adaptation, but the original nature, the self that existed before the adjustments, before the performance, before the mask. Individuation is what real self-love is. It is not a single act, but an ongoing process, a daily return, choosing the genuine response over the acceptable one, allowing what is actually present to exist without immediately reshaping it, treating your own needs, your own feelings, not as problems to manage, but as signals worth listening to. There was someone, we can call her Dana, who understood the language of self-love very well. Boundaries, self-care, all of it. And yet, beneath that knowledge, she was still giving from emptiness, still saying yes, when something inside her was saying no, still adjusting, still performing. And the shift did not come from something dramatic. It came from a small moment, almost invisible, in conversation, where instead of responding automatically, she paused and noticed what was actually there: a quiet irritation, a tiredness, a desire to leave, and instead of immediately changing those feelings into something more acceptable, she allowed them, privately, honestly. Nothing changed on the outside, but inside, something real had occurred, the first moment, in a long time, where the genuine self had been present. And that is how this work unfolds, not through sudden transformation, but through small, consistent moments, where the real self is allowed to exist. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and this is the deeper meaning of self-love, not performance, not perfection, but the quiet, ongoing permission to be real, even in the smallest moments. It sounds simple, and yet it is one of the most difficult things a human being can do, because it asks something that the wound made dangerous a very long time ago: presence, real, unedited, unmanaged presence, inside your own experience, staying with what is actually there, instead of reaching immediately for something easier, something softer, something more acceptable, being honest about the irritation, the tiredness, the quiet wish to be somewhere else, instead of generating the response that keeps everything comfortable while leaving you empty. And this kind of honesty, practiced slowly, in small moments, across ordinary days, is what real self-love is. Not something dramatic, not something performed, but something lived. And it changes everything. Not because it makes you easier to love, but because it makes you finally present to yourself. And that presence is the only thing that can ever reach the place inside you that all the giving has been trying and failing to fill. And if something in this feels familiar, if there is a quiet recognition forming, the sense that what you have been calling self-love has not quite reached what it needed to reach, then even noticing that is enough for now. Just naming the difference, letting the awareness exist without needing to fix it, because that is how this work begins, quietly, without force. And as that awareness deepens, something else begins to open, something many people misunderstand, something that feels like loss, but is actually a form of freedom, the ability to let go. Not because you have stopped caring, but because you have begun caring for yourself in a different way. So allow your breathing to slow a little more now. Let the inhale arrive gently, and the exhale carry something with it. Not everything, just a small piece of whatever tension has been sitting in your body longer than you realized. You do not need to name it. You do not need to understand it. Just let it move with the breath, out, into the quiet, into the space that is slowly deepening around you. You are safe here. You are held here. And what you are moving toward now is something most people spend their lives circling, but rarely enter fully: the quiet interior space, where real letting go happens, not the kind that is performed, not the kind that looks resolved on the surface, but the kind that unfolds, slowly, in the unseen places, where you have been holding things, often without even knowing, because you have been holding a great deal, more than you may have ever fully counted. Not only the obvious things, not only the relationships that ended, or the losses that were clearly named, but also the quieter things, the expectations you absorbed, before you could question them, the versions of yourself. You tried to become the image of the life that was supposed to unfold differently, the subtle grief of what never quite arrived. All of it, held carefully, faithfully, for longer than it needed to be held, and tonight, slowly, gently, you begin to set some of it down. When people say they cannot let go, they often think of a person, a relationship, something external. But underneath that, something deeper is being held, a version of yourself that existed in that connection, the way you felt, the way you were seen, the particular kind of aliveness that became available in that space. And when the connection ended, it was not only the person that was lost, it was access to that version of you. There was someone, we can call her Karen, who had been trying to let go for years. She did everything she was told. She processed. She reflected. She moved forward. And still, something remained. And when she looked deeper, she realized she was not holding him. Not really. She was holding the version of herself that had existed in his presence, the version that felt more alive, more open, more real than anything she had accessed before. And letting go felt like losing that aliveness, losing that self. And so she held on, not to the person, but to the feeling. And when she finally understood this, something changed. Not quickly, not all at once, but steadily. She began to access that aliveness directly from within, instead of through someone else. And as she did, the holding began to loosen, not because she stopped caring, but because she no longer needed the connection to access the self that had always been hers. And this is what real letting go requires, not forcing yourself to move on, not convincing yourself it did not matter, but understanding what you were truly holding, and slowly learning to give that to yourself. And if there is something in your life that you have been holding, something that has not yet released, you do not need to solve it tonight. You do not need to understand it completely. Just acknowledging that it is there is enough. Because often, the first step is simply this: recognizing that the holding is happening and allowing that truth to exist without pressure. And beneath that holding, there is often something else, something deeper, something that has not yet been fully felt. Grief, not always obvious, not always loud, but present, waiting. Because grief is not something to fix. It is something to move through. And when it is interrupted, when it is managed, or minimized, or pushed aside too early, it does not disappear. It waits quietly in the interior until it is allowed to complete itself. There was someone, we can call her Lynn, who lost something deeply important, and from the outside, she seemed to handle it. She continued. She functioned. She moved forward. But inside, the grief had not finished. It had been paused too early, and so it remained, beneath everything, shaping her experience, quietly, persistently. And when she finally allowed herself to feel it fully, not in a controlled way, not in a measured way, but honestly, something unexpected happened. It did not overwhelm her. It released her. The feeling that had been compressed began to move, and in that movement, space opened, and in that space, something returned. Presence, aliveness, the ability to feel again. Because what blocks life is not grief itself. It is the grief that has not been allowed to move. And tonight, you are allowed to feel whatever remains unfinished, not to force it, not to create anything, just to allow what is already there to exist. And from that place, another layer begins to reveal itself, a quieter kind of grief, one that is harder to name, the grief of the life you thought you would be living, the version of yourself you believed you would become, the timeline, the image, the sense of arrival that never quite came. And many people carry this, without recognizing it, as grief. They feel it as pressure, as being behind, as not quite enough, as something missing, always just ahead. There was someone, we can call her Beth, who lived this way for years, always reaching, always moving toward a future version that never quite arrived. And when she stopped, when she allowed herself to simply be where she was, without measuring, something became clear. The version she had been chasing was never truly hers. It had been shaped by expectation, by comparison, by inherited ideas of what a life should look like. And the grief was not for something she lost. It was for something that was never truly hers to begin with. And when that became clear, something softened. Not everything, not immediately, but enough to begin living in the life that was actually here. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," and what this means, in the quiet truth of your own experience, is that avoiding the pain of real loss never actually removes it. It only changes its form. It becomes softer on the surface, but deeper underneath, more diffuse, more constant. The ache without a clear cause, the flatness that follows even your best moments, the sense that something is always just slightly missing. And these are not random feelings. They are the quiet signals of grief that has not yet been allowed to complete itself, grief that was held back because it felt too much, too overwhelming, too inconvenient for a system that was already carrying so much. So tonight, here in this quiet, you are allowed to feel whatever remains unfinished, not to force anything, not to create emotion, but to let what is already there exist, fully, without needing it to be proportionate, or appropriate, or resolved. You are allowed to grieve what you lost, and what you never had, and the version of your life that did not unfold the way you believed it would. All of it, without editing, without pressure, without the demand to already be over it. Because this honesty is not weakness. It is the beginning of something real moving again, something that has been waiting, quietly, for a very long time. And as that movement begins, another layer reveals itself, a quieter kind of grief, one without a clear object, the grief of the life you thought you would be living, the version of yourself you believed you would become, always just ahead, always just out of reach. And many people carry this without naming it. They feel it as restlessness, as being behind, as never quite arriving, as a subtle gap between what is and what was supposed to be. But when you stop, even for a moment, when you allow yourself to simply be where you are, without measuring, something shifts. You begin to see that the version you were chasing may not have been yours at all. It may have been shaped by expectation, by comparison, by the quiet pressure of a world that never asked what you actually wanted. And the grief is not for something lost, but for something that was never truly yours. And letting that go is both liberating and deeply human, because it means grieving the time spent chasing, the energy invested, the parts of yourself that were set aside along the way. And yet, on the other side of that grief, something becomes available, something simple, something real, your actual life, as it is, your actual self, as it exists now, not ahead of you, not waiting to be achieved, but already here. And as your body continues to soften, as your breath slows, your attention can begin to move gently inward, toward the body itself, because the body has been holding what the mind could not, the tension in the shoulders, the quiet tightness in the chest, the subtle weight in the stomach. These are not random. They are the record of everything that has not yet been fully felt. And when you bring your awareness there, without trying to fix, without trying to understand, just being present, something begins to shift. Slowly, gently, the body begins to release what it has been holding. Not all at once, but enough to create space. Because real change is not only understood, it is felt. It moves through the body, through the nervous system, through the quiet intelligence that has been waiting patiently for your attention. And as you rest here now, you may begin to sense something deeper still, something beneath all the layers, beneath the grief, beneath the holding, beneath the stories, something that has always been present, quiet, steady, unchanged. The part of you that was never wounded, never lost, never broken, just waiting. And this is where something important begins to return. Trust. Because somewhere, at some point, there were moments, small ones, repeated over time, where your own inner knowing was questioned, dismissed, overridden, and slowly, without you noticing, a quiet conclusion formed that your own interior could not be trusted. And so you learned to look outward, to check, to confirm, to seek reassurance, not because you were weak, but because you adapted to survive. But that inner knowing was never lost, only buried, only quiet, waiting. And now, here, in this slowing moment, it begins to return, not loudly, not dramatically, but gently, like remembering something you had forgotten. And as that trust returns, something else becomes possible, the experience people call coming home to yourself, not a dramatic arrival, not a perfect state, but something quieter, the simple experience of being present in your own life, of the self that is here, being the real self, not the managed version. It may come in small moments, a thought that feels true, a feeling that is allowed to exist, a breath that feels deeper, more yours. And you may notice that the more you are present with yourself, the less you need to reach outward, the less you need others to define what you feel. And from that place, something remarkable happens. Relationships change, not because others change, but because you are no longer reaching, no longer depending, just present. And in that presence, something real can happen. Connection, without effort, without fear, without the need to hold anything in place. And this brings us gently to the truth of letting go. Letting go is not giving up. It is not indifference. It is not stopping caring. It is releasing the grip, the effort, the tension, the holding. It is allowing what has been held to move, to settle, to find its natural place. And when the grip softens, something else appears, something unexpected, quiet, not emptiness, but space. And in that space, presence, your own presence, more available, more real, more yours than it has been in a long time. And this quiet has always been waiting on the other side of everything you have been holding. And now, as you drift closer to sleep, there is one final thing to understand. Your comeback is not something ahead of you. It is already happening. In every breath that slowed tonight, in every moment you stayed, instead of escaping, in every small recognition, every quiet shift, all of it, already the return, already the movement, back to yourself. And you do not need to hold on to any of this. You do not need to remember it. Your mind can rest now. Your body can soften, because the work has already begun, and it will continue quietly, in the background, in the ordinary moments, in the days ahead. And so now, let everything settle. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. You are safe. You are held, and the place you have been moving toward is not somewhere new. It is somewhere you have always been, and now, slowly, gently, you are finding your way back. You are home. Sleep now, deeply, and rest.